What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, I wanted to go over my thoughts on what the new meta is going to look like here in Pokemon Go. There is a new moveset update happening in just a couple of days, and I figured might as well take a deep dive into what that meta is going to be. Now, I made a tier list live on my stream with the help of Homeslice Henry, Final Boss AJ, Dunebug97, and Yakai. You know them as great content creators and play Pokemon battlers, so some of the best people in the game to try to figure out what this meta is going to be. Now, as you can see here, just glancing at this list, there's a lot of old faces on top. There's some new faces here, though, in this meta, too. It wasn't exactly the biggest update that we've ever seen here for the new season, but there's some key players that will definitely make some waves in this next season. So as we can see, I have all of these tiers divided all the way from S tier, which are basically just the best Pokemon you're going to see, down to A tier, which, those are the Pokemon that you might see pretty often, but, maybe not as much as the S tier. B tier are viable, maybe somewhat spicy picks. C tier being Pokemon that maybe they could have some play. Then down here we have D tier, which, if you're crazy, you might be able to make them work. And at the very bottom, we have some garbage Pokemon, but we don't have to go over those just yet. Instead, let's take a look at the top down to see exactly what this meta is going to be. So at this top, we have a lot of old favorites. In fact, all 5 of the S tier Pokemon are picks that were not necessarily buffed or nerfed, in this season. They're just Pokemon that they're very strong and they're not getting any worse here, and we know just how strong they can be. This first pick, obviously Galarian Corsola, basically the only ghost type in the game that has all the bulk as well as the great offensive pressure this Pokemon has. We have Pokemon like Dusclops that has a similar bulk stat to it, but it doesn't have that offensive prowess of Astonish. We have Dusknoir, which is a very offensive Pokemon, but nowhere near the bulk. Corsola is a perfect blend between bulk and damage, which makes it a very scary pick. Next up, Shadow Caesar. This is a Pokemon that I think we've been, a little bit annoyed of for the last couple of seasons here. That Bullet Punch offensive pressure is such an oppressive thing to deal with. The worst thing about it is not just the Bullet Punch damage, though, but that 1 in 8 chance to get that Night Slash boost, increasing your damage by 50%, as well as Trailblaze, great coverage against a Water-type Pokemon that could generally answer this Pokemon a little bit. And because it has that guaranteed attack boost, no matter what, Shadow Caesar always puts on a lot of damage. And on the next Pokemon here, it's going to be Empoleon, which is basically, it's not exactly like Shadow Caesar, right? They're both steel types, but I mean, what Empoleon does that Caesar doesn't is, first of all, it has a little bit of bulk. I mean, Empoleon's still not that bulky, but that water type coverage really pairs well with that steel typing, giving it play against the mud slappers that you might not want to see, as well as the fire types in the meta. With that said, though, the next Pokemon is going to be Gastrodon, which is a mud slapper not actually weak to that water typing, which is why I think it's one of the best Pokemon here in this next season. I think that the main reason Gastrodon is in the S tier is because of some nerfs. Well, maybe not necessarily nerfs, but some Pokemon we're going to see a little bit less of, namely Altaria. You're probably going to wonder, why is Altaria going to be a little bit less used? And I mean, just take a look at the top of the A tier here. We'll get to that in a second. But mainly the thing about Altaria going away is Gastrodon is so much more safe, so I feel like Gastro is going to be a fantastic Pokemon here coming up. And finally, Talonflame, specifically Shadow Talonflame, is one of the best Pokemon when it comes to just 2 shield ramping up or potentially using a shield advantage and sweeping the endgame. This Pokemon, it honestly does take quite a bit of skill to use because it is a very squishy pick, and you're using Incinerate, which is not exactly the easiest fast move to use, but in general, it's a very hard Pokemon to take down if you're not ready for it, and it has a lot of good play into the S tier as well. You resist Mud Slap, you're able to Incinerate all the way through an Empoleon in the 2-shield matchup. Don't even ask about how bad Caesar is into that Fire-type Pokemon, and even Galarian Corsola isn't too bad into it, so that's why I think Talonflame here is up there in the top picks. Now, moving into the A tier, we're not going to go quite as in-depth on all of these Pokemon. I do want to give the highlights, though, because we have Unova Stunfisk. The main reason this Pokemon is here is because if we take a look at the S tier, we only have one hard loss with Gastrodon, and it's one of the best ways to answer Talonflame, has a very playable matchup into both Empoleon as well as that Caesar, and even Corsola isn't that bad. Mainly, the thing that is keeping Ufisk on top is the fact that there's not really any real grass types. The only grass type really in the meta, at least in the past, was Cradilly. We actually have another new one coming up here in just a second I am very excited to go over, but Ufisk is still a very annoying core breaker, a Pokemon that has a lot of play even in these interesting metas where, while there are a lot of Mudslappers around, there's basically, I don't know, every team might have one answer, but then a whole bunch of weaknesses to Ufisk. So it's a good Pokemon, it's a good core breaker, so make sure you're prepared for it in the next season. Up next is actually our first buffed Pokemon in this new meta, and that is going to be Celio. This Pokemon receives access to Icy, or not Icy Wind, Powder Snow, that is, being buffed with its damage. So, Icy Wind, no, dude, I'm missing all these words. No, it's Powder Snow is getting a damage increase. So, Celio's fast move is going to do just a little bit more damage. And because of that, it's going to be able to be a lot better neutrally into a lot of Pokemon that you might see in the meta. And it has access to Body Slam, a very spammy move, and Surf, which is a pretty solid coverage move for it as well. What I think is going to hold Celio back is some of the S tier Pokemon does give it, a little bit of trouble. We have Shadow Caesar that in the 2-shield matchup is absolutely terrible for it. Empoleon also walls all of the energy. But aside from those two Pokemon, honestly, it has play against almost the rest of the meta. We have a couple of fairy types up next. Alolan Ninetale's also getting that Powder Snow damage increase, which I think is going to be very helpful for it. Wigglytuff is unchanged, but it is still a monster because of its normal typing, as well as its fairy typing, a very unique core breaker. And then Clefable, another Pokemon receiving a buff in this season. Meteor Mash is going to have its energy decreased, so now it will only take 5 Fairy Winds to reach a Meteor Mash. And if you don't know what that means, that basically means every 5 fast moves, it's able to reach a Frenzy Plant clone, and that is kind of insane. It means also now you can run Meteor Mash and Moonblast and have Meteor Mash as a bait move, which if you're using a 100 base power move as a bait move that you get in just 5 fast attacks, that is very scary. With that said, it is hard-walled by Steel-type Pokemon as well as Fire-type Pokemon, so it's not the best coverage, but I think as long as you avoid those matchups, it's going to be a very scary Pokemon. And there it is, the next Grass type that I wanted to talk about. Incinerate Gourgeist is, I think, deceptively good here in this coming meta. While Gourgeist is weak to a lot of different fast moves, Ice, which is getting buffed here with Powder Snow, as well as Sucker Punch, Astonish, Incinerate, Peck, all of these high damaging fast moves are technically super effective into Gourgeist. But with Incinerate, as well as the Shadow Ball buff, which is going to be a very good combination now, saying it is only going to take 3 Incinerates for that first Shadow Ball, and then 2 for the second. That pacing is absurd, and combine that as well with Seed Bomb only taking 2 Incinerates to reach, and I think Gourgeist is going to be kind of a sleeper pick here in this meta. It might not even be a sleeper pick, it might just be hard meta here, because it is such a solid Pokemon, and one of the worst things about Gourgeist is it pairs very well with Bastiodon. Basti, I don't know why they buffed it last season, but it's already had a lot of play. Gourgeist pairs almost perfectly with it, saying it can take down the fighters, the mud slappers. It can also take down just a lot of neutral Pokemon that you might not want to see as a Bastiodon, and Bastiodon takes down the fire types, it takes down the flying types, very good into the darks and the ghosts as well, just neutrally. So Basti Gourgeist, I really should not be giving this advice, but it's a pretty good core, so I guess keep an eye out for that here in the coming season. Next up, Cradilly, a staple in the current meta. It's going to be very good in the next one as well, although the steel types are going to give it trouble as they currently do, but once again, avoid those steel types, it has a lot of play. Then we have Galarian Moltres, another Pokemon that has access to a lot of damage that's not necessarily getting buffed in this season, but it should have a lot of neutral play, pretty neutral into that S tier category, and while it is a little bit slow for its charge attacks, it has great damage with Fly as well as Brave Bird. Up next, we have another classic here, the Kanto Marowak, which is a Pokemon that we all know as a great Mud Slapper. And while Mud Slap here is not getting nerfed in this season, it does feel like there's a lot of ways to neutrally deal with Marowak, whereas Gastro, with its water subtyping, gives it a bit more defensive coverage. Marowak is a little bit less good defensively, but it still has that great offensive pressure of ground and rock type damage, so I think Marowak is still a pretty good pick here, still definitely in the A tier. Up next, Corviknight, which is another Pokemon that has a lot of good matchups here in the Pokemon that we see in the top usage. While it is a Steel type, though, it's not actually the best into the Fairy types for some reason. I bet it does have a pretty good matchup into Clefable, but I bet Ninetales, after that Powder Snow damage increase, it's going to be a pretty sad matchup if you're not on Ironhead. But if you're on Ironhead, then the Ghosts are worse for you, so it's like, I don't know exactly what moveset you might want to run on Corviknight. You probably still run Payback as well as Air Cutter, but it makes it so the fairies are a little bit less good for you. But I do think Corviknight is pretty good neutrally, and it does have a lot of decent matchups in this coming season. Up next is another Sucker Punch user. It's going to be Furret this time, though, so non-stab Sucker Punch damage. But we know Furret is already a pretty neutral Pokemon in this meta. It will have to watch out for the Fairy types that are getting buffed here. Ninetales as well as Clefable, likely not the best matchups for it in the world. And we also have to keep in mind that it's a Pokemon whose energy goes almost nowhere against Steel types. And there are a couple of Steel types that we already see here, right? Corviknight as well as Forretress, and I guess Shadow Caesar as well, but Shadow Caesar doesn't necessarily resist anything with how squishy it is. But it's a Pokemon that has a lot of good neutral play. I feel like it's going to be pretty consistent here in this coming season as well. Dusknoir is in a very similar boat to Furret in the way that it has a lot of great neutral play, but it's a Pokemon that if you end up giving it a lot of energy advantage, it can just unwind an entire team. Unless your opponent has like a Furret or a Wigglytuff or maybe a Galarian Moltres, Dusknoir is generally a very hard Pokemon to take down. Feels like the second best Astonish user behind Corsola, so that is why it's in the A tier. We have Steelix up next. I think Shadow Steelix is the way to go. Steelix is, I mean, it's weird to say, but it's basically an electric type Pokemon. And we're in a meta now where Dedenne got nerfed. And with Dedenne not being anywhere near as common, that means electric type damage is going to be a little bit more rare. We do have Unova Stunfisk, but that doesn't have a lot of fast move pressure. If you want that electric type damage as a fast move, you go for Steelix, and Steelix likely will not disappoint. And finally, to round out the A tier, another Steel-type Pokemon, it's going to be Forretress, the other bug and Steel-type Pokemon in the meta, aside from Shadow Scizor. This Pokemon does look pretty solid against a lot of the fairies that we're going to see. A lot bulkier than Shadow Scizor as well, but we do have to keep in mind it is a little bit slower, and it is also just deathly afraid of that Gourgeist. So if Gourgeist is common to try to counter Scizor, then potentially Forretress could be in a little bit more trouble. We'll just have to see, though. I think Forretress is going to be a pretty strong Pokemon, just as a very solid neutral pick. And now, after that A tier matchup, we have all the B tiers here, which means that these are Pokemon that you might see a little bit in GBL. You know, every now and then you'll see them. They're very meta picks, right? But they're not going to be quite as meta, not quite as mainstream as some of the picks we just talked about. And here, I mean, Clodsire, I've never really liked Clodsire, but it's undeniable its bulk is just so good that it can carry its way through matchups, but it is very slow, so it's not quite my cup of tea. We see, though, the next Pokemon is a very interesting one. It's going to be the Doublade, a Pokemon which I am very excited to see how it plays out. Now, this is a Steel and Ghost type Pokemon. It's getting access to both Shadow Claw as well as Sacred Sword, so its coverage is almost unstoppable. We know Annihilate, which is right next to our Doublade here, is going to be a very similar coverage with that Fighting and Ghost type damage. The only Pokemon in the game to resist both is Hisuian Zoroark. And believe it or not, but that Pokemon is not that good. So I think that Doublade here is potentially a great offensive pick. But what does worry me about this Pokemon, and why it isn't higher up on this tier list, is it is weak to Sucker Punch, it's weak to Astonish, Incinerate, Mud Slap. Basically, every high damaging fast move in the game, this Pokemon is weak to. And Doublade is not that bulky. It's kind of around the same bulk as Annihilate, maybe Swampert, Venusaur. If you know how bulky those Pokemon are, then you know how bulky this one's going to be. So it's not necessarily squishy, but it's not bulky, and it could potentially be in a spot where a lot of the fast move pressure could be bad for it, but it is also one of the best counters in the game to Pokemon like that Empoleon or that Shadow Scizor. And it's also just so strong neutrally into a lot of Pokemon, saying Shadow Claw and Sacred Sword are both such efficient attacks. So I don't know exactly how good it's going to be, but I feel like it is a very solid pick. Up next, we have our two monkeys here, Annihilate and Primeape, both a little bit scared of the fairy types that we're going to see here in this coming season, as well as Gourgeist is probably not a great matchup for them. But because these Pokemon have such dominating matchups, and because there's not a lot of fighting type pressure in the game right now, it can be a very good surprise pick into your opponents. So I feel like very solid Pokemon, but potentially a little bit more RPS than I'd like them to be. Then we have Spidops, a new addition to the meta. It did not get nerfed. I was kind of expecting a Rock Tomb nerf, but no Rock Tomb nerf means I guess Spidops can keep on Spidopsing it up. It might be able to have some play here in this coming meta. Togekiss, one of the more interesting Peck users, I'd say, in the game. It has access to Aura Sphere to counteract the Rock and Ice-type Pokemon, but it is pretty squishy, and it's not exactly the best in some neutral matchups like against Corsola, so it's a Pokemon that has play. It can be a nice core breaker, but it's not the most reliable pick. Then we have a ton of Water-type Pokemon here. Now, I think the main reason the water types are all lumped together like this is there aren't necessarily a ton of matchups where water types are going to have a hard win in this season. We have Talonflame at the top, but a lot of Pokemon that don't necessarily lose to water types, so they're pretty neutral, but they're not necessarily going to be finding a lot of great matchups. Blastoise, Lapras, Feraligatr, Azumarill, and Jellicent all can do very similar things, although I guess I should mention, Jellicent here, with the Shadow Ball buff, is going to be in a unique position where it only takes 4 hexes to reach a Shadow Ball now, so a little bit spammier to that heavier hitting attack. I think that might actually be pretty good for it. It also walls off the energy from Celio, has a lot of good play as well into the S tier, so Jellicent might be a little bit underrated here, but I'm not quite sure how it plays out, saying Hex is not the best fast move in the game, but it should be able to have quite a bit more play now that Shadow Ball is a little bit more spammy. Then we have another electric type here. It's Charjabug, which, man, I don't love Charjabug, but it feels like a Pokemon that always does give my team some trouble. I always forget about this Pokemon. And I mean, Volt Switch did get buffed, right? It doesn't have a lot of damage with Discharge, but Volt Switch damage does so much, and X-Scissor is a very efficient move, so I think Charjabug is a pretty solid pick. And I guess, speaking of Pokemon I don't want to rate highly, Carbink is up here quite a bit as well, just because Carbink has a lot of targets. It has a lot of polarizing matchups, obviously, but I'd be disingenuous to say it's anything worse than this. It's a Pokemon you can use if you want to. I hope you don't want to use it, but it's there. It's an option. It's one of the few rock types. It destroys Talonflame, so if that Pokemon is annoying to you, I guess you could use this as a counter. We have Murkrow up next, another Peck user, which is able to take advantage of that Foul Play buff in this season. Haven't quite yet talked about that, but Foul Play getting a bit of a damage increase might help it out in some neutral matchups, but I'm sure it's still just a pretty neutral Pokemon, although very squishy. And speaking of squishy, up next, Blaziken, getting access to not only Ember as a fast move, but Aura Sphere as a very spammy charge attack. Now, if you know what Aura Sphere is, you know it's a Hydro Cannon clone. And we have Ember as well, which means we have 5-4 pacing to Aura Sphere and 6-6-5 pacing to Blast Burn. It's a very spammy Pokemon, very offensive, very squishy though. But I think that Blaziken, in the right hands, could be a very scary Pokemon if you're a talented trainer. If you like Shadow Charizard, then potentially Blaziken could also be up your alley. Then we have Ludicolo. I think Ludicolo is a potential very safe pick in this coming season. It gets access to Astonish as well as Weather Ball Water as additions to its moveset. And because it has Astonish, and because of its typing, that means it's good into other ghost types. It can be the Astonish user that beats other Astonish users, and its defensive typing allows it to beat Mudslappers as well. This means a lot of the fast and pressure Pokemon out there in the meta, Ludicolo can deal with. Ludicolo also has an interesting dilemma where it could have Leaf Storm or Ice Beam. I think Ice Beam would be my intuition on the move you might want to run, depending on what we see in the meta, though. I mean, Ice Beam would be more for, like, Altaria, which, I mean, you can see Altaria is right next to it on the list. I feel like Altaria will drop off in usage a little bit, but I do like that Ice-type coverage, but you could also run Leaf Storm for that heavier hitting attack to just guarantee shields or knockouts earlier on. It's honestly a little bit of a dilemma. I don't know what move is going to come out on top. I feel like it's really going to depend on what the meta is looking like, but Ludicolo, don't sleep on this pick. It's not even that squishy. It's a decently bulky Pokemon, and it's going to have access to some pretty good pacing now with Astonish as a fast move. And as we were talking about it, Altaria here is going to be, I think, a little bit less used. We can just see so many Pokemon above it here that give it trouble. The Ice types, the Fairy types, the Steel types, the Rock types, they're going to be around quite a bit. Altaria was pretty safe here when Florges was the main Fairy type, but Florges, you can see it right next to it. I don't think Florges is quite as good. I feel like the other Fairy types are going to start outclassing it just a little bit, so Altaria might take a little bit of a step back from the meta. And because of Florges being, not the best Fairy type in the game, it's going to be a pick here that is going to, I think, kind of drop off a little bit in usage. We see it a lot right now in Catch Cup, mainly because that's one of the few Fairy types that you can really build in Catch Cup right now. But when we have all of these other options, including Clefable, which is able to pace to the same pacing as Florges is to Chilling Waters and Trailblazes to Meteor Mash, why would you ever run Florges when you can just run Clefable instead? I feel like it's a Pokemon that, there's, I guess, uses for it against fire types, but it's not even that good into them, so I guess we'll see. But I don't see Florges being quite as strong here in this coming meta. Up next, Tinkaton, another Fairy type, but a Fairy and Steel type, very unique Pokemon, but its moveset really does hold it back. It's not got great attacks here. Fairy Wind's a good fast move, but Bulldoze is atrocious. And I mean, Play Rough's alright, but when you're relying on Play Rough as your main damage-dealing move, it's a little bit underwhelming, and there are quite a few Pokemon, especially like most of the S tier here, that will give it some trouble. Sableye, getting access to Foul Play buff. It's a nice buff here. There's not necessarily, I'd say, a lot of targets for Sableye, but it could be kind of neutral here. Gotta watch out for some of the Fairy-type Pokemon and some of the normals, but avoid those, and I mean, Sableye could be a decent neutral pick. I think Mandibuzz is actually kind of an interesting Pokemon here, where it's getting access to the Foul Play buff as well as the Shadow Ball buff. There's a chance now Shadow Ball Mandibuzz on Snarl could be kind of an interesting play. Only 4 Snarls to reach a Shadow Ball, and Foul Play is going to do a bit more damage. You could, I guess, also run Aerial Ace, but I don't know. I don't know if Aerial Ace is efficient enough here on Mandibuzz to go over the Shadow Ball Foul Play moveset. Mandy as well is a little bit outclassed by some of the other Pokemon in the meta, but if you want to use it, it is still viable. And I guess speaking of viable here, we also have Goodra, a Pokemon that I think at this point, man, I want to like Goodra so much, but its charge attacks do no damage. It's got great coverage, but the coverage doesn't do much when the damage is still pretty underwhelming. But as far as dragons go, it does have decent coverage into Pokemon like Celio, which we might see quite a bit. It's also got more play into Empoleon than some of the other dragons, so as far as dragons go, it might still have some play. We'll gloss over some of the picks here in C tier, mainly the Pokemon getting buffs in this coming season. Licky Licky is getting Shadow Ball buffed as well, which means now it is only 4 rollouts to get that Shadow Ball. So you have that Body Slam buff and the Shadow Ball buff, which means potentially Licky Licky could be an interesting neutral Pokemon, but I feel like there's just better normal types, better rollout users as well if you wanted to use them, but it could be a Pokemon to keep your eyes on. To Titan as well, another Pokemon, it's actually getting triple buffed. Powder Snow, Superpower, and Weather Ball, or not Weather Ball, it's a Icicle Spear actually that it's receiving as a charge attack. So very efficient moves. It's Mono Ice type though, and I feel like Mono Ice might not be the best typing in the game right now. Um, but its moveset is pretty efficient, so I wouldn't be surprised to see this as a Pokemon that some people could make work. Let's see, moving through some of these Pokemon, Malamar got that Foul Play buff, but I'll be honest, in this coming meta, I don't think Malamar has a great chance at winning a lot of these matchups. Fairy types, bug types everywhere, Sucker Punch users, Galarian Moltres, it's just, there's a lot of things it's got to watch out for, but potentially with that Foul Play buff, it could still have some play. Regidrago, honestly, is an interesting case, because it has access to the Vice Grip buff. Not only is it getting Vice Grip added to its moveset, so it has a cheaper normal type attack than Hyper Beam, but Vice Grip is becoming a normal type clone of Psyshock. Psyshock is a very efficient charge attack. Obviously, non-stab damage is not going to be the greatest, and normal type coverage is not necessarily coverage, but when you're using a Mono Dragon moveset, you'll take any coverage you can get. It's also a spammier move than Dragon Energy, but we also have to keep in mind Dragon Energy is losing 10 damage, so it's going from a Frenzy Plant clone to an Avalanche clone. Still a very efficient attack, but slightly less damage in those neutral scenarios. I don't know if Regidrago will have a lot of play in the Great League. In the Ultra League, though, potentially this is going to help it out quite a bit. And even in the Great League, it could still have some play. Let's see, anything else get changed here in this tier? Yes, actually, Walrein is a Pokemon that is pretty interesting because it has Powder Snow as well as that Icicle Spear damage increase. But I feel like, the issue with Walrein is it relies too much on Ice-type damage. Celio has access to very spammy Water and Normal type attacks, whereas Celio or Walrein is only relying on Ice-type damage unless you either opt for Water Pulse, which is not quite as efficient as you'd want it to be, or potentially Earthquake, which takes a lot more fast moves to get to than you might like. So I feel like there's just better Powder Snow users in the meta right now if you wanted to use a Water and Ice type Pokemon, which is kind of sad. I love Walrein, but I think I'm just being realistic at this point. It's not quite as flexible as some of the other ones. So that's the C tier in a nutshell. D tier, we see Toucannon, which just got Beak Blast. I feel like Toucannon is just a downgrade to Fearow, saying Fearow has Drill Run coverage. But, Toucannon, it might be a Pokemon you could make work. Beak Blast is a very efficient attack, an acrobatics clone that always lowers your opponent's attack. So, I mean, if you're a Spice Lord out there, you want to try out a Toucannon, give it a go, but its coverage is very much lacking. We have a lot of the Dark types here in the lower tiers, because I feel like Dark types in a meta where Fairy types might be a bit more common, be kind of hard to run. We have a Samurott. Hisuian Samurott is getting access to Sacred Sword, which is a very cheap normal type, or fighting type attack, that is. And that could help it out a little bit, but I feel like without having access to a heavy-hitting stab attack like Hydro Cannon, it will be a little bit underwhelming in a lot of scenarios, but, I mean, the coverage is greatly appreciated, but I think it's still not quite where we want it to be in the meta. Auroras is getting access to that Powder Snow buff as well, but Ice and Rock might very well be one of the worst defensive typings in the game. It's double weak to the Steel-type damage that you see on Empoleon and Scizor. It's also double weak to Fighting-type damage, very weak to Mud Slap, weak to Water. There's so many weaknesses with this Pokemon. I would suggest not using it if you could help it, but if you're, once again, a Spice Lord, you might be able to make it work. Um, let's see. I guess we also have access to Weather Ball Water on Bronzong. Better coverage against the waters and the fires, but it's still just kind of an underwhelming Pokemon. It's going to be great for limited metas, but I think for the Open Great League, it's still going to struggle a little bit here. We got Brick Break buffed on the Hakamomo. I think it's still not going to be a great Pokemon. It's only 10 damage increase. Brick Break was a really bad move. Now it's just kind of a bad move, so I don't think that's going to help it out too much here. And then the garbage tier. These are Pokemon that may have been buffed. The Pokemon on this tier list are all Pokemon that were in the top 100 of PvPoke. So if they're here and you're like, why are they on this list? It's just because they're on the top 100. So these Pokemon probably unusable in the new season. Spiritomb, maybe a little bit harsh with this one, saying it, it has Sucker Punch, Rock Tomb, Shadow Ball, but it's so slow to getting to its attacks. It's like ranked number 18 or something on PvPoke as of recording. It should not be that high. It should not be anywhere near that high. Don't use this Pokemon unless like you want to be a Spice Lord, but yeah, it's not that good. Poor Gligar. I don't know why they even nerfed Gligar so many times. It's just not good. Oranguru as well, not a great defensive typing in a Sucker Punch and, Bug Bite and like all these fast moves that are good against it meta. Klefki got access to Foul Play getting buffed. I don't think that's going to help it out too much here. Aegislash. Oh, Aegislash, my favorite Pokemon in the Pokemon franchise. Unfortunately, not in Pokemon Go PvP. I guess it got the Shadow Ball buff, but unless they ever buff Charging, which is its fast move when it's in shield form, it's always going to be kind of underwhelming. And while it did get that Shadow Ball buff, it already had a 50 energy move with, I believe, Gyro Ball. So it's not really going to help it out too much here, having access to another 50 energy move. So I would still suggest not using this Pokemon. It is very hard to use in the first place, and very weak to a lot of common fast move pressure Pokemon, so I don't see it, at least not just yet. Hydreigon here, getting Fly, it's kinda cool. Still gonna suck. Matang is just worse than Bronzong, because Matang has, it doesn't have that coverage option that Bronzong has, and it's weak to very similar typings to Aegislash, so I don't know, it's pretty hard to pair Pokemon with it. And Castform, don't ask me how Castform snuck in to the top 100 usage, or the top 100 Pokemon on PvPoke. It is kind of crazy to say, but yeah, this is the meta. This is where I think the meta is going to lie, at least at the start of the season. There could always be Pokemon that I'm not quite rating properly here, but I mean, I had fellow world champions, fellow regional champions, fellow content creators help me out make this list. So it's not just my opinion, it's the opinion of a couple of experts as well, where this is where the meta is going to look. I feel like a lot of these Pokemon are very similar to Pokemon that we've been using for the past season or two, but there are a few new additions. Celio is going to be very intriguing to me. It's a pretty bulky Pokemon. Powder Snow damage increase is going to be huge for it. We have access to Pokemon like Gourgeist as well, the first ever non-stab Incinerate user, which could be big. I feel like it's going to be a very unique Pokemon. And yeah, this meta, it's interesting. I honestly don't know if I like this meta. There's a very centralizing Pokemon here at the top. I feel like Shadow Caesar is going to be way too centralizing with a lot of these picks. It's very feast or famine if you're good or bad into Caesar, and that Pokemon will centralize things quite a bit. But aside from Shadow Caesar, this meta is looking pretty fun, and I'm excited to see where it goes. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with any of these rankings. I know some of these Pokemon might be a little bit subjective, maybe some bias here on some of these rankings. So yeah, let me know if, you think I put something in a spot where it shouldn't be. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.